Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Our topic for today is...
A great marriage, but no sex. What can we do?
Oh my, and this is a very common problem I see a lot, and we will have a lot to say. And this topic was generated by a listener letter. We might as well say right off the bat here, if you have a topic you would like us to cover in this podcast, please write to us at...
Bruce.
I put you on the spot.
Yes, Bruce at ctin7.com or Judy at ctin7.com.
And you notice that nifty new, relatively new now, we've had it for a couple weeks, that nifty new domain name. We've got ctin7.com, CT for couples therapy, and it's the number 7. So ctin, the number 7.com, ctin7.com. Couples therapy in 7 words. And that will take you, don't be surprised, by the way, when you do that and it goes to the website, and what it says up on the website is couplestherapyin7words.com, because that's really what our domain name is, and we have parked it there. And for those of you who are techies, you will understand that little bit, right? Exactly. There I go again, right? So, also, we would like to invite you to let folks know about this podcast. As more and more people are doing, our numbers are really have taken quite a jump after that lovely profile that was done on us in 7 Days, a newspaper in Vermont. So please check us out. And while you're at our website, ctn7.com, you can check out our our merchandise. For those of you who are just listening to this, we are holding up our beautiful Couples Therapy in 7 Word mugs in the 11-ounce and 15-ounce sizes. On one side, it has the beautiful logo that was designed by my beautiful wife.
Thank you.
And on the other side, it has our inspiring message.
Be kind, don't panic, and have faith.
Which is the 7 words, folks, that this whole business is based on. So, we will also mention, before we get into our topic, let's mention...
the book that started it all, Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
Which is available anywhere books are sold. You can just ask people to order it. I am listed on the cover as Dr. Bruce Chalmer. That's how you'll find it. Of course, you can also get it on Kindle from the Amazon site, and also as an audiobook where I did the narration. So we hope you will do that, as many folks have been doing as well. So, Judy, let us get into this topic. Do you want to just sort of launch into the question that generated it? Would that be a way to do it?
Sure. Why don't we do that? Why don't we start off with our question this week?
That's what generated.
We'll mix things up just a little bit this time.
Go for it.
Okay, so we got this letter from Kate, and she writes, Dear Bruce and Judy, my husband Roy and I will be celebrating our 39th anniversary this June. He is 62, and I am 59. We have a good marriage. We like each other as well as love each other. We're each other's best friend, and even after spending so much time together during the pandemic and since he retired in 2019. We spend a lot of time together, but happily, we've even been mistaken for newlyweds. Our only issue is in the bedroom. My libido was never very high, but we managed just fine. I have since gone through menopause. I now experience what is called dyspareunia. Am I saying that right?
I believe so.
Okay.
Neither one of us is a gynecologist,
That's
folks.
true.
But I believe
Although
that's how
my
you say
mother
it.
always called it dyspareunia, so I don't know.
Your mother had interesting ways
Yes, she did.
of saying it. Yeah, dyspareunia, I believe. Is correct.
Dyspareunia.
Yes.
I have been seen by a gynecologist, and we have tried their suggestions with no result. Everything works just fine, but it hurts. With this comes a feeling of inadequacy, guilt, being broken, among others. We both know there are other ways to be intimate, but with my lower libido on top of the pain, I find the idea of sex rarely pops into my head. He is extremely patient, never pressures, and I know he loves me deeply. But we basically have no sex life together. We've talked about making a date, but never seem to do it. We're not really the types to go out on the town, dinner out, movies, etc., especially now in these times. Is it normal for a long-term relationship to go through this? I can't imagine we're alone in this dilemma. We're young, healthy, and active, but I feel this is an area in our relationship that is lacking, and somehow that feels wrong, which leads to more guilt, and the cycle continues. We thought this might be a good topic for your podcast. This is a very difficult subject to discuss with others, so it tends to get buried over and over. We would love to listen to a discussion that might offer tips on how to reconnect intimately with each other.
Well, thank you, Kate. And I will just mention, as I've mentioned before, we do change names. So just letting you know, if you happen to be Kate and Roy out there, it's not you, real Kate and Roy. We changed the names. But this was a letter that came in. And let me address one thing right off the bat. Is this normal?
Yeah.
Now, of course, folks, longtime viewers of this will know I used to be a statistician back in the day. Somebody says normal, I'm thinking average. I don't know if it's average, but it sure is common.
It is common.
It's very, very common. I see it all the time, very frequently in my practice. And this is such a good letter. Look, we appreciate all your letters, folks. This is a wonderful letter because it really, when you're talking about this issue, and we'll have to broaden this a little, because I said, issues like one of the parties saying they don't have much libido comes up a lot in my practice, right? Much of the time, it's associated with they're not getting along very well.
Right.
Like if it's the woman, let's assume for the moment, as these are, it's a heterosexual couple. So the woman happens to be the one saying she has no libido, and often what I'm hearing is the man's kind of a jerk about it, and they're having other issues in their relationship, and I'm not trying to just blame men for it or blame women for that matter.
But that doesn't seem to be
But that's what's interesting here.
The case here.
Yeah, they're friends. He's really sweet about it, and she appreciates that he's sweet about it, and she's sweet about it. Her worrying about it is sweet. Do you know what I mean? Because she knows there is something, and here I'll just lay out what is, I think, fairly implicit here. There's something good about sex in a relationship when it's working well. It often reflects the fact that the relationship is working well, but it also helps the relationship work well. And so now I suppose, we've gone a few minutes into this, and now I got to mention Sheva Marcus, right?
Yes, we're going to be quoting a lot of Sheva on this episode, somebody who we've actually interviewed a couple of times on our program.
Yep.
She happens to be a sex therapist and has a wonderful book called Sex Points.
And we are going to be liberally stealing from her ideas.
Thank
you,
Sheva.
We will tag you when we post this, so you know that we are stealing from you, and I hope not doing injustice to your work.
You'll let us know.
You'll let us know, yeah. But it is really interesting because, first of all, maybe we should define a couple of terms here.
Okay.
It is often surprising to people when I talk about this with folks. The idea of low libido, and that's essentially the same as low desire.
Right.
Libido and desire pretty much mean the same thing. Low libido is very different from other forms of difficulty with sex. For example, there are some people who are interested in sex, which is to say they're thinking about it, they're wanting it, they'll propose it, but then when it happens, things go wrong, like they don't get aroused, or they...
Yeah, so that's the other part.
That's another issue.
Libido and arousal. I know that Sheva talks about that a lot in her book, the differences between the two of them.
They are, and they are not the same physiological process, which is fascinating. So you get the phenomenon that there are people who will, once they get going, if for whatever reason they start to get into a sexual encounter with their partner, they find that they get turned on and they enjoy it, and then afterward they still don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
That's the idea of low libido. That's what Kate is talking about. There are also issues of people who have libido and can get aroused, but they can't get to orgasm. That's a whole different set of issues.
Right.
Read Sheva's book, right? And she's not the only one who addresses that particular issue as well. So there's all of that. And then what Kate has mentioned is there's pain.
There's pain.
And as Sheva lays out so well in her book, that's a whole different set of issues often. Because there are plenty of people who are experiencing, and when she says dyspareunia, that's very rather specific, I believe, which is to say pain with insertion, pain with something putting in her vagina, as opposed to just sort of generalized pain. And there are people who have that particular issue who nevertheless can enjoy sex, not particularly with insertion.
Right.
And in terms of what you do about it, all four of those things, pain, arousal, libido, and orgasm, have different approaches that you might have to take depending on what's going on. And of course, Then there's the fact that, hey, this podcast, I am a couples therapist. I am not a sex therapist,
Right.
and I'm not a MD, right? I'm not a gynecologist or any other kind of MD. And it turns out it's interesting because those of us who come out of, couples therapy, we're always thinking, oh, it must be relational. There must be something in the relationship, And plenty of therapists will simply assume that, oh, you're having pain with intercourse, it must be you're tensing up because you're having a problem in your relationship,
Right.
or you've been traumatized or whatever. Which, by the way, sometimes is true.
Sometimes it's true, but that doesn't seem to be the case here.
That's what's so. That's why this is such a great letter. That does not seem to be the case here. She is talking about a really sweet relationship. It sure sounds like she sounds very clear
Yep.
about that.
And she's having actual physical pain.
And she's having
And she's been
right.
diagnosed.
Yes, she went to her gynecologist. That's the thing to do, right? Of course.
That's right. And that's something a lot of people don't do.
It
they
is.
will go to a therapist and
And
instead of going for a physical checkup, or it should be done in tandem if you're having an issue like this. I would say that
exactly, that's a huge point that Batsheva stresses. But I have to say, she also notes, and I want to be careful saying this. Look, as I say, I keep saying I'm not an MD, I'm not a gynecologist, I'm not a woman, I'm not any of those things,
or a sex therapist,
or a sex therapist, right? I'm a couples therapist, right? Having said that, Batsheva notes that there are lots of gynecologists, with all due respect, who don't know much about this. It's really kind of a bummer. The gynecologist will say, well, I can tell you all about what's going on in your vagina, but they, so they'll try a medication, as Batsheva points out, they'll try a medication, but not do anything about addressing the behavioral or emotional issues involved, because they're often all tied up together.
right?
Or they simply won't know that this is something that is treatable, or, they, as I'm saying, going to your gynecologist may not be enough. You need to go to a gynecologist who's really comfortable talking about not just, insert tab A in slot B. It's sort of like they do in middle school sex education, They talk about everything except the fact that what it feels like.
Right.
They give you the mechanics, but they don't actually address the broader issues. So you need to talk to a gynecologist who knows a lot about this and is comfortable talking about it, which a lot of MDs and frankly, a lot of couples therapists aren't comfortable talking about sex. And so, it can be really frustrating. So one thing I would wonder, and I want to be careful saying this to Kate because, she's tried stuff, you know what I mean? It's not like she hasn't thought of this, but I would wonder, does she need to perhaps get a consult from a gynecologist who is more of a specialist in sexual issues?
Yes.
Rather than just kind of ending it there.
That's probably a good point there.
Yeah.
Because I know that in the book, in Sex Points, Batsheva does talk about treatments for dyspareunia. Do we need to go into them?
We can talk about some of it. Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, it's been a while since I read that section, but I think that there's a device that they can insert. Thank you, dilator, that they can stretch your vagina actually.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting? I mean, again, neither one of us being medical specialists, but isn't that interesting that I wouldn't have thought of that?
Yeah.
You might not have thought of that in the context of.
Well, in the same vein, when my mother talked about
dyspareunia, yes.
It was because I have had a great aunt who was diagnosed with this. I mean, like, this is way back in the day because of my Rhoda. May she rest in peace. Who was married to my great uncle Irving. May he rest in peace. And apparently, she had this from the beginning of their marriage. They never have kids, and I guess her mother told her, "You don't need to stretch for Irving." Actually, I think it was more like, don't stretch for Irving. Irving was...
People had a way of kind of getting to the point in those days. Well, and isn't that interesting? Because it's like, that's a recognition that some of it is literally about stretching.
Right.
And, Batsheva talks about that quite a bit.
Yeah, so we're talking about like way back in the early 1920s and stuff when Irving and Rhoda had gotten married. So it's been going on for a while.
Yeah. Now, with respect to Kate, this is not something that she's had her whole life. This only happened after menopause. So again, that's the kind of thing, certainly consult a gynecologist about, or a sex therapist specifically about, who would tend to know about that stuff. But it is interesting that there are physical ways of addressing that with dilators. What they are is sort of graduated sizes. They start small and then, you start small and then you keep increasing the size until it sort of stretches things out. And it's not only about the physical stretching of the tissues, it's also combined with the physiological response. If you've been experiencing pain, you're going to tense up when something is inserted.
Sure.
So
Sure, and then even the anticipation can make you tense up even more.
Exactly.
So she's got the stretching thing going on,
Mm-hmm.
and also your vagina tends to dry out after menopause,
Mm-hmm.
so that could be a hormonal thing too that they can treat with hormonal creams and
Yep.
I think other hormones like testosterone, which
Well,
people often think that it's a
testosterone,
male thing, but
yeah, but
women
that's
need
not
it.
about the dryness. That's about the desire.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. So again, people often don't know this. Read by Sheva's book. She talks about it. And again, I've read this in other places too. Both men and women have testosterone. Both men and women's testosterone levels affect libido. Now, the average male testosterone level is way higher than the average female testosterone level. But if a woman's testosterone level is lower than it used to be, she is apt to experience far less libido, far less
right,
desire.
low desire.
I remember, I was always fascinated by this. I remember hearing a podcast or an interview on the radio or something, and this must have been 5-6 years ago at least, from a trans man, and was fascinating because this trans man, of course, previously was assigned female at birth, had a vagina and female sex organs and all that stuff, and so as part of the process of transitioning, started testosterone.
Uh-huh.
And what he said was, it was really and I'm not going to quote him exactly because I don't remember this that well, but I remember being impressed with it. What he said was, he had always been, even as a woman, had been attracted to women.
Mm-hmm.
So when he transitioned, was still attracted to women. But what he found was, when he started taking testosterone, his experience of seeing an attractive woman in the street, previously, I'm paraphrasing wildly here, but previously, if he would see an attractive woman in the street, he would say, "That's someone I'd like to get to know."
Uh-huh.
And after he started taking testosterone, "That's someone I'd like to, let's just say, have sex with."
That's a nice way of putting it.
That's a nice way of putting it. And it's interesting because, it's not to the exclusion of getting to know her,
Sure.
but it's like, ooh, that's arousing.
It's a desire, right?
It's a desire
It's
issue.
a
It's like,
desire and getting aroused when you're saying that. Yeah.
testosterone stimulates that. It's partly hormonal. That's part of the deal. Now, we also note that when a woman is experiencing dyspareunia, that can do a number on libido. And you were saying that very tendency. That can do a number on it because if basically you've been having behavioral training so that you start having intercourse and it hurts.
Sure.
You keep getting physically punished for having intercourse. You're going to start not wanting it. You're going to develop an aversion to it.
Right.
So an aversion certainly does a number on libido. Do you know what I mean? It's so interesting because if she didn't have dyspareunia, there are still plenty of women who they don't experience pain, but they just got nothing in the way of libido happening.
Right.
So there's lots of ways of addressing that general issue of libido, but it is all tied up with, is it okay to talk about it? How do she and Roy, I think was the name that we used for her husband. How does Roy feel about it? Is he, again, they sound like they have just a really nice relationship and can talk about stuff. And that can possibly lead, it's interesting. She said that. She knows that there are other ways to be intimate. That's an important point. As Batsheva is so often stressing, the
Got
sex
hands, mouth, feet, ears.
That's right. Yeah. Ears is interesting. I haven't thought about that one. Maybe you can. I don't know. But there was some really raunchy limerick that had something to do with that. But never mind. But that idea that, of course, sex is not just intercourse.
Right.
There's other things you can do. But then what she noted is, she said, we both know there are other ways to be intimate, but with my lower libido on top of the pain, I find the idea of sex rarely pops into my head. And that's what lower libido means. So that, when she is trying to address those issues of libido, well, let me just come back around to the whole idea of sex points.
Okay.
the whole concept that Batsheva puts forth in that book and why it's called Sex Points is she says, you can think of it as a point system, that if you have enough points, whatever number you want to use arbitrarily, if you have enough points,
right?
yeah, 100 points or
100
something,
points.
then by golly, you'll be interested in having sex and you'll have it and it'll feel good and everybody's fine, And if you don't have enough points for whatever reason, it won't work so well. And so the point is that there's lots of different factors involved in gaining or losing points. And you have to go after a lot of different factors. So there are drugs now that can be used for women that seem to help a little, at least some. Batsheva points out that some of the drugs that they have, they don't seem to be that effective, but part of that is because the clinical trials that they do on those drugs, in order to factor out all of the different, in order to isolate the factor of the drug, they insist that you not be doing anything else about it. So you take the drug, but you're not allowed to be doing therapy at the same time. And she points out that no, the drug can help together with therapy so that you can actually learn how, she talks a lot about learning how to fantasize.
Right.
And learning how to talk to your partner about things. All of that stuff can be done together, and it tends to be synergistic. It helps, so just approaching it. But again, what's interesting to me as a non-drug person, as a non-MD, is the drugs can be helpful as kind of part of it. It's similar to what I note in working with folks with depression. If you just look at the research on how well drugs work with depression, meh. They work pretty well for some people and not very well for a lot of people,
Yeah.
But together with, they often can get somebody over that initial problem
Right.
enough so that then the talk therapy becomes more effective. They can actually start to think of things differently from how they could before because it kind of gets them out of the rut.
Yeah.
So it's funny, I was going to say get him over the hump and then get him out of the rut. Anytime you're talking about sex,
You get this double entendre.
everything is double entendre right, when you're talking about sex.
Exactly. Yeah, so I would suggest, Kate, that you seek out a good sex therapist under these circumstances. A good starting point, I'm going to plug Batsheva's book, Sex Points. Read through that and read through some of the sections that you feel apply to you. And hopefully there's a good sex therapist in your area, or if not, you might need to take a little vacation.
You might, and look, these days, telehealth is
Right.
really useful. So
That's
in terms of working with a sex therapist, that can work just fine. A gynecologist is going to need to examine you, but telehealth is available, and there's sex therapists, I'm sure, places you can have access to. I also want to address something very specifically. I kind of already said this or implied it. I can't imagine we're alone in this dilemma. Let me assure you, you are not alone in this dilemma. This is a very, very common problem. It's difficult, but there are people, and you read in some very inspiring stories in Batsheva's book of people who recovered and rekindled their sex life, and it really does help. Especially in a relationship like this where they clearly love each other and like each other, and they're really sweet together, and it sounds like they'd like to be sexually intimate again. And those are the conditions where it often works really well.
Yeah, and I was going to say also that until such time that if it can be resolved, because it might not be able to be resolved, if penetration is a problem, there are other things that you can do with your partner that don't include penetration, that are still sexual, that if you're having a desire problem but you do want to please your husband, there are other things that you can do with him, and we don't need to spell that out here. You probably know what they are.
She already knows that clearly. She knows that, but I want to address that because it's an interesting point you make. Libido, desire, is specifically about that thought that you form in your mind about, oh, I want to have sex with, I want to be sexual specifically with my partner. But there are indeed, I see this frequently, especially with somebody who just sounds so loving and her husband is loving,
Right.
That notion of saying, well, I'm not thinking about sex, but I know he'll love it.
Right.
And when he loves it, I'll love it. You know what I mean? In other words, I know it'll be good for us. It's sort of like it's like going to a movie with your partner that's more your partner's movie than yours, and you'll be okay. It's not like you're repelled by it. It's just not, it's men going to rom-coms. You know what I mean? It's that. I mean, it's like, why, stereotypically, right? I happen to like rom-coms, but I'm weird, But, the stereotypical man going to the rom-com, or it's funny, just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with a couple where the man went to a, what do you call that, where it's a wine tasting and they're drawing art, sit and draw, or sit and sip. That's it. Yeah, something like that, or sip and paint, or
sip and paint, and one of
those things. And and this was a guy who just never would have done something like that. He was obviously and explicitly doing it to make his wife happy.
Right.
But clearly, and they went together with another couple where the guy was just like him, and the two men at the end of it said, "Oh, we should do this again." And not because they were that's the most fun they ever had, but because they did enjoy it, and they enjoyed pleasing their wives. And so that's very similar.
That's a nice thing.
Yeah, it's a sweet thing, right?
Yeah.
That is very similar to a woman in this case who she knows, she's not drawn to it. And of course the dyspareunia is an issue. She's going to be, she shouldn't get hurt by it. You know what I mean? But that notion you were saying, well, she could do some sexual stuff with her husband that doesn't cause her pain, that might actually give her some degree of pleasure. But what will stimulate it for her without much libido, kind of by definition, what will stimulate isn't because she's desiring the sex, it's because she wants to do something sweet for her husband.
Exactly.
Which is lovely. I mean, says the husband. But look, I know the other way around.
Yeah.
I should mention that too, before we get too far out of that. This happens to be the woman reporting the low libido problem.
Right.
I haven't counted, but in my practice, it's close to 50-50, I'll bet, in terms of, if one of the partners has low libido, it is by no means always the woman. It seems to me it's almost as often the man, maybe not quite as often, but almost as often the man. And I've had plenty of, recently and in the past and everything in between, lots and lots of couples where the woman is saying, I want to have sex, and he has no interest.
Yeah.
He just won't initiate, and the story, and actually this works for both partners. The story often develops that the high libido partner, relatively speaking, proposes it, and the low libido partner very often declines. And over time, the high libido partner just feels so hurt and rejected and undesired, they give up.
Yeah.
And then
must have pretty bad effects for the relationship.
Well, it does if you think about it, because that exacerbates the whole problem.
Yeah.
Because what happens now is, if there was some degree of libido on the part of the low libido partner, so that they would sometimes have said yes, but really want the other person to do the initiating. I'm going to come back to that point in just a second.
Okay.
But then that just goes away. So all of a sudden now the whole thing is kind of off the table, and because it's just too painful for both partners to even talk about initiating.
Yeah.
The bit about saying that what was my point? Oh, I lost it. There was something I was going to come back to, and I lost what the point was. Let me go over that one again. Sorry, folks. But now you're seeing this in action. You see this shows you that we don't script this. Right? We do not script this. No, that idea. What I was talking about was the idea of the cycle that happens when the high libido partner just doesn't propose it.
Right.
Ah, yes, and the low libido partner would have maybe said yes. Yes, that's what it was. I have seen couples where, and again, this one I think tends to be more gendered this way, although I couldn't swear to it, but where it's usually women who will say, I want him to be the guy. It's like a woman who doesn't have a libido problem, but her libido is, what she's desiring is that he propose it. Do you know what I mean? She wants to feel desired. Her libido is all about saying, I want him to feel. So
she wants him to initiate.
She wants him to initiate. That's her form of sexuality. Obviously, there's nothing that's true of everybody. That's certainly not true of all women. But I've heard it from quite a few, where, no, I want him to be the one to initiate because I want to feel desired that way. So she does not lack any libido at all. She's all about wanting it. But if he doesn't initiate it, she doesn't feel desired. It's sort of like, it's not so much a libido issue in that case, it's sort of a sexual compatibility issue. Akin to, there are those folks that I've certainly encountered where, they're two fine people, they both have active libidos, but what they want in sex, what they're desiring, simply isn't compatible. I've met folks where what they want is to be not merely dominated, but humiliated. And that fascinating couple I worked with early in my practice, I learned a lot about that through that. It's like, it would happen to be the woman who was this very high-powered, in the rest of her life, this very high-powered type woman. So it reminds me of the phenomenon of male CEOs who go to dominatrixes. Do you know what I mean? They want to be dominated, humiliated, whatever. And she was sort of like that. And she happened to be a woman, but she was this very powerful woman. But what she needed in her sex life was to be humiliated. And her big, strong, gruff husband couldn't do it. he could pretend.
Yeah.
And she knew he was pretending, so it didn't work. It was really interesting. So there are folks where they've got libido going, but it just isn't compatible. And it's like, oh, bummer. And then, the obvious sort of quintessential example of that is it's a heterosexual couple where one of them actually figures out they're gay.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, that's just not going to work, folks. You're playing for the wrong team. Sorry about that. So there's those sorts of issues as well, which again, those aren't libido issues. Those are compatibility issues.
Right.
And that's true. But see, that's what's so great about case letter. None of that is true. This is just like they get along well and they love each other and they like each other and they're sweet to each other and they can talk about it, and she just has no libido happening.
Right.
So,
and in addition to that, she's having pain.
And indeed, she's having pain, which certainly doesn't.
But she also said she always had low desire, so it's not like it's something new. But it sounds like it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So.
All right, Kate. Well, I hope that helps, and I hope we answered your question. And we'd love to hear back from you and Roy and hear how things are going.
Yes, please let us know, and I will write to you. And you already know by the time you see this that I wrote to you and told you we were talking about this. And we would love some feedback on that, of course, and we really wish you well. So, if you'd like to...
If you have a question that you would like us to answer on the air and discuss, please feel free to write us. Again, you can write Bruce at ctn7.com or Judy at ctn7.com, or just visit our website, ctn7.com.
Yep.
And you can also suggest topics.
And you can sign up to be interviewed yourself. We've done, as you know, we didn't do an interview today, but we do lots of interviews.
Yeah, we've got some coming up.
We have some coming up, and folks have been, most of our interviews of late have been folks contacting us to be on the show. And that could be you. If you think you have something you'd like to be interviewed about,
we'll entertain the notion.
We certainly will. And if you go to ctn7.com, you'll see there's a place there you can sign up for a time on our calendar. And as part of that, there will be a question saying, hey, what do you want to talk about? And that's how we'll get a sense if we think you'd be a good fit or not. And we'll let you know. So we hope you will do that. And also, while you're on the subject of our podcast, tell your friends, let people know about it.
Right.
follow
Share,
us,
follow, all that stuff.
And especially if we could put in a special plug for you to share our social media posts. Our Facebook page is Couples Therapy in 7 Words. That's the Facebook page. If you start typing that, it'll pop up. And we would like you to like and follow that. I had a couple of other Facebook pages before we started this podcast, and we've transitioned over to that one. I had one called Ask Dr. Chalmer. If you're a follower of that, I want to suggest that you follow Couples Therapy in 7 Words on Facebook, and you'll see our posts there. We just started we've only done a grand total of 1 TikTok video.
TikTok. We're not dancing.
No, we're not dancing.
That's coming. Maybe that'll be something we should entertain. We can do our CTN7 dance.
We'll have to invent our CTN7 dance, but there you are. So we've been drag kicking and screaming into the 2020s. I guess that's what TikTok is all
like
about.
Something like that, yeah. We're on Instagram.
Yep. And let's put in a plug for
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
Available wherever books are sold. Please get a hold of it, review it, let us know. That would be helpful as well. And as I have been noting recently, I'm working on another book, folks. So stay tuned for that. It'll be a while yet, but I'm working on it. And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.